Hey everyone, welcome back to My Personal Onion. This is a podcast between myself and Albert Yu, CUBING. Today we're going to talk about sponsorships. So how we're going to do this is we have a couple questions from people who submitted them on Facebook and YouTube, and we also have two broad sort of conceptual questions that we're going to tackle. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a comment from Edward Hollingdale. And he says, I'd be interested in hearing Phil remind kids that a sponsorship isn't something they quote-unquote deserve for being fast, but is an actual business arrangement where the person being sponsored is providing a service of value instead of being rewarded for twisting plastic quick. And it would be interesting to hear a discussion of the ethics and, so on and so forth, which is one of our big topics. But, okay, so two things. One is I made a video on this, I believe, last month. It's on my personal channel. It's where I just talk about sponsorships. It was completely unscripted, but I think it contains good information. So if you want to know more about my personal opinions, you can take a look at that. You can also watch this podcast because this is also about personal onions.
Yeah, and the link to that video is going to be in the description as well.
Cool. All right, so, I mean, if you take the dictionary definition of sponsor, it's literally an individual or organization that pays some or all costs involved in staging an event in return for advertising. So, it really is a business decision. Being fast and great at cubing is, a great way to get your foot in the door because it helps you attract viewers and fans and friends. But it's not the only way to get sponsored. At the end of the day, it's about how much exposure and how good of a community you can run around your brand that helps us make decisions. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and actually taking it from the perspective of like anything job related, like just because you're fast, that's sort of the equivalent of having like a really impressive resume. But even if you get offered a position at a job or if you get offered sponsorship, you shouldn't expect that you just receive things without actually putting in work. So regardless of if it's a sponsorship or like an actual job application, it's definitely like a two-way street. And I think that's missing in a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, the job analogy is actually really cool because I've seen, in my years of doing HR and looking at resumes, I've seen people with really good resumes. Mm-hmm. It looks like they dot all the I's and cross all the T's academically, but then, the other elements of a human are kind of, they can be missing, like a personality, yep. A willingness to work with others, I guess like teamwork in that sense, just like an air of approachableness that, you can come talk to the guy without being socially awkward. Yeah. There are a lot of other elements of a human that extends beyond like achievements that are quantitative.
Yep.
So, so that's something to think about. It is really like applying for a job because you're doing a job and you're getting paid for it somehow, right?
Yeah.
So that makes sense. And it kind of makes sense too because a lot of cubers sometimes they can be young, and because of that they might not have too much job experience, so they don't quite understand what's expected of them at a job. Whereas some older cubers understand, I need to be more than statistics, right? I need to be more than a resume.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so Cubing ENCODED asks, definitely discuss the actual feeling itself of being sponsored. Personally, I feel like I hyped up the idea of being sponsored to the point where actually achieving it felt unfulfilling. Did you or anyone else have similar feelings? So would you like the first crack at Mr. ENCODED's question?
Yeah, it's weird because I started YouTube when sponsorships were a very different thing. Because back then sponsorships were like a video by video basis or puzzle by puzzle basis instead of what we have today with like full sponsorships and other things like that. And I remember back then, this was probably like 8 years ago now. Actually, it might have been longer than this, like 2010 or something. I remember the first time that I got a puzzle to review that it was like the most incredible thing ever because back then I didn't have really like money of my own to like spend on puzzles. And so, the idea of actually being sponsored, even just once, like for a single video was wild. And I think these days the expectation obviously is to have some sort of long-term sponsorship. And I do think that sort of changes how people view things and how they expect it. So I think if I were to start YouTube now, and to get sponsored for the first time, yeah, I would still feel really hyped about it. I think it's an opportunity that I just wouldn't have otherwise. Like the idea of being able to review as many puzzles as I do would not be possible without a sponsorship. I do know that for Cubing Encoded specifically, his goal for like doing YouTube videos and all of that was to get sponsored, so that he could have puzzles. I think he was like very, very honest about that. And I think because that was his goal, I think very similar to other things in life, once you reach that goal, it's actually a little bit unfulfilling. Sort of like, for example, if you want to be, let's say, sub 10 or sub 12 on 3x3, the moment that you actually get that, you just want to keep chasing. And I think the thing with sponsorships is there's very little to chase afterward, at least currently. So it's like, yeah, you want sponsorship. That's what you're chasing. Once you get it, what do you do next, right? So if your whole goal of starting a YouTube channel is to get sponsored, I do think that you'll probably be very unfulfilled. Whereas for me, when I started YouTube, I just wanted to make videos. And so the idea of being sponsored was just something that I didn't really expect. And so for me, it was very fulfilling, and it was really exciting.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely think the means to the end, or I guess the end goal, should be to create more content and to benefit the cubing community. Mm-hmm. There's no shame in wanting to be sponsored, if it helps you get resources or recognition or anything. But that, like, to me personally, that can't be the end goal, right? Because what that means is as soon as you get the sponsorship and you secure what you're looking for, you have very little incentive to keep going, right? Yep. So when I look at people to sponsor, one of the thoughts in my head is, what is the long-term prospect of this guy? Is this guy gonna continue to be himself or herself and make stuff the way they do, or are they just going to change and maybe lose steam or effort or change in a way that is not great for content creation? So that's definitely something to think about. And for me personally, I was actually never sponsored. I own a company who sponsors people, but personally I was never sponsored, and I received very little help with equipment when I was younger. Mm-hmm. Back when I was good at cubing, our company was really young and financially not in a real position to extend that much help.
Yep.
Of course, it's not the company's fault. It's what a young company, that's just the position that it's in. And when I got older and the company became, a little more able to sponsor people, I wasn't good anymore. So, yeah, I never had the feeling of being sponsored, and I think that's why I'm so interested in sponsoring people. We operate a very large sponsorship network, I think, in part to perhaps fill the void, in addition to being, there for people who actually need materials and for people who we think can help our brand. There's definitely a void where I have no idea how it actually feels to be sponsored in a cubing context. Mm-hmm. Ryan Wu. What qualities do you look for in a cuber for a sponsorship? What are some requirements you look for in a cuber to sponsor them? All right, so suppose you had a cubing company. What would you say to this?
I think it goes back to that first question. It's a lot about potential value. So I think the answer that a lot of people expect is, if you're really fast, then you should be sponsored, or if you have 300,000 subs, then you should be sponsored. But going back to the first question, if I were a store and I wanted to sponsor someone, I want to make sure that they're actually going to provide value to the store, be it advertisements or networking or other things. But if they're just going to be receiving products and then not really doing anything with them, that's not someone I want to sponsor, regardless of how popular they are or how fast they are.
So our sponsorship application is holistic, which if you've ever gone to school, you'll know that it's a term that describes looking at something from a wide variety of angles so that you don't focus on one thing in particular. Yeah, we actually leave it vague on purpose so that we can see who knows what they're talking about, when they're looking for sponsorships. I like a person who's assertive. I like a person who understands their own, personal brand, has a self-awareness. Mm-hmm. A person who communicates really well, a person who doesn't ask, how many subs do I need to get sponsored? it's better to ask, I am this person, here's my brand, I'm cool because of this, I'm better than everyone else because of this, can I get a sponsorship? That's the question that you should be asking versus, oh, I have like XYZ subs, can I get a sponsorship?
Right.
Have some self-confidence, and of course, just the regular things like you can't be a criminal, or you can't represent a bunch of competing brands, or very common sense stuff. But like deep down inside, the person should have self-confidence and self-awareness of what their personal brand is and what kind of value they add. So very similar to your answer. Okay, so now we have a good understanding of this sponsorship stuff. The first intellectual discussion is ethics in sponsorships. So ethics in sponsorships is a pretty interesting thing because it always involves conflict of interest, right? Conflicts of interest are one of the most troubling things in all of existence. When one guy's playing for two teams and no one knows what their priority is. So when we use the terms ethics and sponsorships, what goes to your head first?
It's really about the idea of being a brand ambassador and not sort of double dipping.
Okay.
So if you want to represent a brand, then you need to represent that brand and not really like a competitor, for example.
Sure.
There's also so it's weird because there's also different types of sponsorships. So if you're sponsored by a company such as the Cubicle, it's different than if you're sponsored by a manufacturer such as GAN, right? Because I think in both cases, ethically, especially if you're someone who's making YouTube reviews, for example, because I'll talk more about that since that's just what I'm more familiar with. Of course, you want to be honest, but I think it's hard when you're sponsored by an actual manufacturer because you have a lot of incentive to say really good things about their products, right?
Yeah.
And I think the really nice thing about actually being sponsored by the Cubicle is that you're not the manufacturer, so I'm not going to hurt your feelings if I tell you that the GAN RS is one of the worst cubes right now, right?
Like, I'm a really sensitive person. I'll have you know the GAN RS is amazing. I can't say that with a straight
even then,
face.
right? Like even if that were the case, if you felt really strongly about it, like it doesn't hurt your brand, right? It's not.
No.
Yeah, and so it's like there is this weird dichotomy that shouldn't really exist. I think if ethically speaking, regardless of if you're an ambassador for a manufacturer or a company brand, you should be honest, but I think it can be very difficult, especially if you're receiving some sort of income stream from these sponsorships. So it's tough, but it's one of those situations where if you're someone who's being sponsored, you need to think critically about what your values are, and whether or not you're willing to be honest, or if you're going to essentially be a sellout. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that comes to mind, or two things rather, for ethics and sponsorships is one, honesty during reviews, which is something you kind of talked about.
Yep.
And so honesty in reviews is really interesting because you know how you mentioned that from a manufacturer level, it's like kind of a pressure situation if you get a puzzle you don't really like, but then you have to say something good.
Yep.
I think that works on the retail basis as well. You get a bunch of puzzles from the retailer, and if you're gonna spoil the fun and say, oh, I don't like A, B, and C, yeah, D is like garbage, it makes you scared that the retailer will be like, whoa, hold on a second, this guy is so aggressive, I'm going to take a step back and not going to send him stuff in the future.
Right.
Because, the retailer does pay for this stuff, somehow in some shape, way, or form. So, yeah, there's definitely still that, like, pressure. And the other thing that, is... that I think has a lot to do with ethics and sponsorships is self-awareness and awareness of what your brand is about. I think if I'm an opinion leader of a given brand and my job is to communicate to other people that my brand is better than the other brands, I should probably know what I'm talking about with respect to the products and the services of the other brands. Otherwise, it makes me feel like I'm really ignorant, and I'm going to just, be a broken record talking about the one thing I do know without having any awareness of what else is out there, right?
Yep.
So I think brand ambassadors actually have a lot of responsibility to learn as much as possible about the community.
Yep.
So that when they deliver their opinion, this product is good, this brand is better than that brand because, they have credibility and say, oh yeah, I did all the research and this is why A is better than B, but C and D are equivalent. It has some weight and some credibility behind it. Otherwise, it seems like they've just, they're just speaking because they were told to by a brand.
Yeah.
So,
question for you though: if you wanted to make a review video after a lot of other people had already made a review on some puzzle, would you watch those videos before making your review, or would you make your review independent of those videos?
Yeah, so I do not my reviews, but like the company's reviews on kind of like a staggered basis. So whenever I play with a puzzle, I always form my own opinion first. I also get puzzles really quickly, so the chances of me watching a video but not like having tried the puzzle is like kind of low. But I form my opinion first, and I might script the video but not actually act on it and prepare the video fully until I look around and see, what the other opinions are. But honestly, I've never really changed my opinion of a puzzle based on the opinion of another person.
Yeah.
It's very unlikely.
I think for me, well, actually these days I just don't watch other people's reviews almost ever until after I've uploaded mine.
Of course, okay.
Because it's in the past when I was really small, I would actually try to watch more popular YouTubers' opinions first because they have more experience and they have sort of a larger voice and a larger audience, and so I would sort of curb my opinion to be a little bit more in line with that. Generally speaking, it wasn't really a big deal because I think we all sort of agreed, a cube is clicky, a cube pops, whatever. Like back then, it was fairly objective and it wasn't really a problem. I think as I got bigger though, and especially after I got sponsored, I kind of stopped watching other reviews first because, especially these days, I feel like everyone sort of says the same thing, and it's just not, one, it's not really that helpful. But two, if there's a cube that I think is okay, but not fantastic, for example, I don't want to be influenced or pressured by other people to say that the cube is better than it is. And so I think that's led to a few occurrences now where I've given a cube, it's still a favorable review, but it just isn't like mind blowing to me. And I'm like the only person who ends up saying that. And it's funny because there's all these other reviews that say, this cube is should be everyone's new main or something. But then,
that's categorically wrong, but okay.
Right, but also it's funny too because you watch those people's videos and they'll upload averages of 5 or 12 or whatever. That's not the cube they're using. So like clearly there's something missing, right? Like if the cube is as amazing as they say, you would think that would be the cube that they use in every single video. And I think people sometimes sort of forget that. They watch a single video, like a single review video, and they think that is like that must be the case. But I think as viewers also there's some responsibility of actually sort of watching a lot of other videos and not sort of getting into the mentality of okay, well, these two people say the same thing, so it must be true. It's good to just exercise some form of like critical thinking and scrutiny. For sure. And I think having your own opinion and being able to express it in a way that's different from the rest of the people, that's where the credibility comes from. Yep. If you're going to recite very generic information like this cube weighs X, it's this many millimeters wide, it has this feature, I think it's pretty good. I think that style of review, it could be easy on the eyes, it'll look good and it'll be like well edited and good music and good personality, but it has very little authentic content. Yeah. That's just me, being really picky and me as a like a cynical critic. That's when I stop watching a review.
I'd rather watch something with like perhaps a narrative or perhaps an interesting take on the puzzle or the manufacturer or anything really that it makes me think, oh wow, this is interesting. I didn't think of it before.
Yeah. Actually, one thing that I also just remembered was sometimes I'll make a review and I'll have almost like the exact same phrasing as someone else just by coincidence.
Sure.
And I think people will comment on that and be like, hey, you copied this person. And to me, it's actually like, I sort of wear that with pride because it's like, well, okay, that means that it's probably a pretty good statement then if like two people are independently saying the same thing. So that's another thing too, is for me, it's good validation when I make a review without watching other people's first, and then we end up saying very similar things. Yeah, that's always really nice.
Yeah, it's funny how people say you copied. Copying, by the way, I think in most legal contexts involves intent.
Yep.
Yeah, to intent to copy. If two people independently come up with something without referring to each other, it's technically not copying.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah, words. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, ethics is always, it's a changing thing. People have different moral compasses, but it's a thing we care about a lot. And as a sponsor, we never pressure anybody and have never pressured anybody to leave a positive or negative review on really anything. It would be horribly out of place to force people to say a thing or two without actually inviting them to give their entire 100% true opinion. Yep. All right, moving on. $2 hugs. I'm just gonna ask the one most people are thinking. You, CubeHead. So, CubeHead is a very good YouTuber. If you guys don't know the story, we extended a sponsorship deal to him before he reached like 300 subscribers. And people are like, yeah, that must be a record for the least number of subscribers a person got before they got sponsored, right? For like YouTube content. And honestly, my response to that is like, for all the companies out there, like if you've ever seen one CubeHead video, regardless of the number of subscribers, you would have to be blind not to immediately sign him as a sponsored cuber. Like you would literally have to be either blind or have horrible business judgment, because this guy he's a smart dude. He's very decent at cubing. Like I see him get like 8s and 9s. He's not a slow guy, right? He's great editing, great taste in music, very organized, very consistent, good sense of humor. The dude is a very good YouTuber. And even when he was his channel was really young, like 300, 200 subscribers, dude was teaching pseudo slotting.
Yeah, I actually learned from him.
You can't okay, so now you're talking about a guy who has a good grasp of the YouTube formula and how to make it, who also knows these advanced concepts in cubing. You'd have to be terrible at your job not to sponsor this guy. Honestly, like it's such a good idea, and he's taken off. He's very successful, and he has not lost his personal touch. Like you can still, every time you click on it, you expect him to greet you in the like really friendly way, as if like you've known him for years, and his conversational tone, all the quick cuts between different segments of his videos, it's all there. His style is really attractive and consistent, and he's one of the people who have really, I think he's grasped how people enjoy cubing on YouTube. Not the only way people enjoy cubing on YouTube, but like certainly one of them.
Yeah, he also fills a niche that I think is missing in the community, which is sort of this like more vlog style content. And not to say that other people don't do vlogs, but I think his is like, it's a very modern take. I don't think any other channel does what he does. And like you said, he has skills to back it up as well. It's not just that his content is entertaining, but like he actually has enough cubing knowledge to where you can actually learn a lot from his videos in a way that's very entertaining. And it's totally just his style, and it's awesome.
Yeah, and he does things that normally people don't do. Like his content is very diverse. So yeah, I think he's very close to being a complete package. He's the real deal. And I'm not surprised people are subscribing to him. He's like legit.
Yeah.
All right, the next name is really familiar. Jay McNeil. Some thoughts on the difference between being sponsored as a fast person versus being sponsored as a big YouTuber would be cool. All right, so I guess maybe this question's more directed towards me, but I mean it's very different, right? The amount of direction a person needs is also really different. You know, there's a big difference between a Max Park and a JR Cuber.
Mm-hmm.
You know, JR Cuber kind of markets himself, like he comes out with the video and people watch it and it's like cool, right?
Yeah.
Max Park, he does a lot of stuff but doesn't communicate as much with the audience because he's Max Park.
Right.
So, you know, there needs to be a different mix of efforts going in to make sure that his brand and his content is being seen. So I think there's almost always a split between like, are you a fast cuber or are you like a YouTuber, right?
Yeah.
It's the people that meet both criteria. That's when you know you're good.
Yep.
Right? So like early on, Chris Olsen was one of these guys.
Yeah.
Great YouTuber, great cuber. JPerm and CubeHead are both, you know, very decent cubers and very good YouTubers.
Yep.
So I think that's what makes these people so powerful. It's because they know what they're doing in two different areas. Sometimes you get, you know, people who have great editing, who know how to make a wonderful YouTube video, but they are not good at cubing, and they don't back up their reviews with enough explanation for me personally to find it credible.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think that's one of the biggest things I found different between like 2013 and now in terms of like the YouTube community for cubing is that it's a lot of really fast people now who are making videos. And in a lot of other communities like sports communities or whatever, a lot of the really popular YouTubers are basically the best at their craft. I think a long time ago on YouTube, there was this difference between like really fast people who just didn't care about making videos and then people who cared about making videos but just weren't really that good at cubing. And so I think that's why it feels like there's always this split. But I think that split is very quickly disappearing. And people who are fast are also making YouTube videos, and people who make YouTube videos are actively trying to get faster. So they're definitely converging.
Yeah, converging. And the people who have converged have generated results.
Yep.
You can see that. All right, so this next question is actually between two people. They asked a similar question. Hunter Avalona and John Nelson Lorenzo, they ask, are cubing sponsorships like contracts that need to be renewed? For example, the cubicle signs you under the brand for 3 years, but you lose interest in cubing. Do you need to fulfill the contract, even if there is one? And yeah, contracts are very common in sponsorships, and we have them. We would be really silly not to. And, you know, nobody wants to make life terrible. Okay, that's like the number one rule of being a cool guy is not to ruin the living experience of another person. So if a person, you know, if we sign him for 3 years and saying like, oh yeah, you know, in 3 years you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and the person's like, oh yeah, I'm not into it. You know, we're not going to be the jerks that are going to be like, oh yeah, well you have a 3-year contract, so cube for 3 years. You know, it's stupid. You can't do that. So what'll usually happen is the person just comes out and says, honestly, hey dude, I'm not interested anymore. What can we do about the contract? Then we'll say, okay, well, let's end the contract in this day. You'll have certain responsibilities, and then afterwards, you know, you'll be on your own. And we won't necessarily give you the benefits of the contract, but we also won't hold you responsible for fulfilling the contract. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
You can't possibly force someone to fulfill a contract like that.
Right. This also goes back to the idea of the sponsorship being very similar to a job, right? Like a job is not, I mean, there are job contracts, but like no one's going to hold you prisoner to a contract. Like if you want to leave to a different job, there are ways to end the contract.
Yeah, and you leave, and then it's not like I'm going to like email you like a year later and be like, yo dude, like have it on my desk by tomorrow morning. Like you don't owe the workplace that responsibility anymore. You certainly could, but like you're not required to. So
yeah, and also like ending a contract doesn't mean ending a relationship, right? Just like with a job, you could go back. So let's say, you know, for me, I picked cubing back up years later. Yeah. So it's good to not burn bridges. Yeah,
and but at the same time, you know, it's good to formalize understandings between people so that it's everything is clear.
Yes.
And you'll, like, as an adult, you'll kind of see where that is really handy. When people have their complete understanding written down, it avoids so many mistakes and so many misunderstandings.
Yep.
I think it's really helpful.
Yeah.
All right, this is the last topic, our intellectual discussion on international sponsorships. So cubing is obviously a very internationally appreciated sport/activity, and a lot of people from not North America ask, what is international sponsorship like? How does that work? So I guess, we're both, we've lived in America for most of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
What are your initial thoughts on this topic?
To me, it's weird. So let's say I'm taking the perspective of someone who is an international person who wants to get sponsored.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the same thing. So if you want to be a brand ambassador, you have to have some sort of reason, right? Like you can't just pick a store because whatever, like it's a store that, I don't know, is most recognizable or something, right? Like it needs to be that you feel some sort of tie to it, because otherwise you're just going to be kind of a crappy brand ambassador. And then on the flip side, if I were a store and I wanted to sponsor someone internationally, I think for me, it doesn't really matter that they're international, right? So going back to what you were talking about earlier and what we were discussing about the qualities of Cuber and who do you choose to sponsor, I think holistically, I think where they live is not super important in terms of, or as compared to other qualities that they might have. But I don't know if that's how you would feel about it.
Yeah, ours is, it's a little more specific. So the thinking goes in steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So number one, what is the business? So the business is a cubing store that sells puzzles on a retail basis.
Yep.
Right? So then you have to think about, where does the company make its income? It's retail sales,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And from who do they make the income? Mostly North America, right? And certain other areas of the world, we have more, recognition and exposure than others. I can tell you for a fact we're bigger in Germany than we are in like Madagascar or like Bangladesh, right?
Yeah, yep.
I just picked two like random places. Hopefully that didn't make, too little sense. But yeah, so you have to think about it. If you're from a place where the cubicle, it's not really big, it presents A, a problem, and B, an opportunity.
Wait,
right?
okay, hold on. Can I interject though?
Sure.
But what if someone, let's say, is a YouTuber from those places, but their main audience is actually in the U.S.?
Oh, of course. Yeah, that assumes that they speak English.
Yep.
And if they do, it would be like really obvious and it would factor into the sponsorship.
Right. Okay, cool.
Yeah, thing. That aside, when these people, make their content, it provides an opportunity and also a risk, right? The risk is, okay, there's no one in my area, so how do I prove that I can actually make sales around me?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm, not hyper fluent in English and working in that area, the opportunity is, okay, there's no one around me, so this is all mine. I'm going to create a following in this area and, create value that way. So it's both an opportunity and a risk. And a lot of these people from, internationally don't do enough to capitalize on the opportunity. They don't ever explain what the opportunities are sponsoring them. All of it is, I live here, can I get a sponsorship? And then it becomes a business decision. Okay, we're not really here, so it's kind of hard to, conduct business or have activity here. And this person is giving us no signs that they can create value in that particular place. So I'm going to assume that the person doesn't have a sense of initiative and can actually pull the weight of, creating exposure in that area. It's very hard, by the way, to create exposure in international areas. Because not only do you have to convince people to be interested in a foreign store, you would actually have to create transactions, and these transactions have costs like shipping costs, and maybe the postal service it gets funny every now and then.
Yeah.
So international sponsorship is very tricky, and it also it happens in places with other cube stores. Like India is a very big territory that we get a lot of interactions with India. There are a lot of cubers there, and they ask, "Hey, Cubicle, can you sponsor me?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, how interested are people going to be in the Cubicle if you have Cube Lilo,
Right.
in your backyard?"
Exactly.
Right? I'm not going to assume India is all homogenous and has one big store in everyone's backyard, but at least it's Indian, and they ship to India very efficiently, right?
Yeah.
They understand the business culture, they understand, how the customers are and how the infrastructure works. So what can you possibly do to create interest in our brand when there's a large brand in your country already? And that question has never been answered. And that's why you don't see Indian sponsorships, because nobody has actually answered the question, how do you create interest and have people see how interesting your brand is when there's Cube Lilo?
Yep.
So that's the $1 million question. If you can answer it, I will sponsor you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And that works with any other place.
Yes.
With domestic Cube store.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, this was really interesting. Still, you're sponsored and I'm not sponsored. So you know what? I wouldn't sponsor myself. That's one of the metrics actually for sponsoring like a cuber who thinks like they should be a sponsored speedcuber, and that is, if you can beat me in the events that I do, then sure, like you've passed the first test. Like if you literally cannot beat me in 3x3, for example, like realistically, I'm not going to sponsor myself. Like I lose too much at cubing competitions to think that I'm a valuable speedcuber. Of course, like most of the cubers who are looking for sponsorships, granted, are younger than me and will probably become better than me at some point in their lives because they have a lot more time and a lot more room for growth. I'm pretty much, I consider myself like kind of peaked, so not gonna get radically faster.
Yeah.
But at this point in time, if you're better than me, that's a good first step. And still unsponsored.
Yeah, but also just to add, like speed isn't everything, right? Because like I'm slower than you. But again, like I think you have to add some sort of value to the community. So if it's not speed, there needs to be some other niche that you fill. Or there has to be some other expertise that you have that other people don't have, right? Yeah,
I was talking about the person who strictly wanted to be a sponsored speedcuber for speedcubing alone.
Ah, gotcha.
Yeah. Our like slowest 3x3 solver is like averaging like 7 seconds or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, you should that, or they are in a territory that's really attractive and interesting, and they've answered the $1 million question. How can I create interest in your brand in this area?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, that happens a lot in Europe. Yeah, people in Europe have answered the $1 million question. People in Asia have also answered that question. Mm-hmm. In Japan, they have answered that question quite well. And that's why we sponsor cubers in Japan, even though cyoubx is massive in Japan, very popular store. Cool. All right, sweet. So this has been a fantastic discussion. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we...
No, I think that's it for this episode, but if there was anything that we said that you guys are interested in hearing more about, or if there's other topics that you want discussed, just leave them in the comments below and we'll try to get to them in future episodes.
Cool. Yeah. As always, be genuine, be straightforward, be confident in yourself, be self-aware. All these things, it's bigger than sponsorships. It'll get you really far in life too.
Yeah, for sure.
If you have those like characteristics. So hopefully, good luck in cubing, good luck in life. And don't, base your self-worth on whether you're sponsored or not. There's a lot of other important things in life.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that's episode 2 of My Personal Onion. Thank you for listening to our personal onions. And we'll catch you later.
Yep. Toodles.
Not toodles.